Welcome to Full Press, a media criticism podcast where listeners and viewers can escape the mainstream media echo chambers for precious 35 minutes or so every week. I am Harrison Lowman, managing editor of The Hub. What are we going to get in today? A media-manufactured conservative coup, or was it the real thing? What's lurking behind the curtain? Everything is fine. Well, mostly, says the CBC in its new report. And women caused woke? So says the most controversial op-ed writer of the year. That's what Tara will tell us, I think, in the next few minutes. Speaking of Tara, here is Tara and Peter joining us from near and far. How are you guys doing today?
That's great, thanks.
Peter's tired because he's been doing very early media interviews. His time, when he's doing interviews from Toronto, it's 5 a.m. So these are the sacrifices that Mr. Menzies does to inform the public. Let's have you sacrifice more. Okay, so I want your opinion on what happened last week. There was Poilievre appeared on a Northern Perspective podcast, which is a conservative podcast. He insinuates that the prime minister and those around him should probably have faced criminal proceedings, violated the criminal code. Maybe some of them should be in jail, in fact. That unleashes a whole bunch of different media coverage. One of the people speaking up is Dimitri Soudis, who's a former senior aide to Stephen Harper. He writes a piece in The Star. Pierre Poilievre is dismantling the principled, trustworthy Conservative Party we tried to build. Canadians are tired of the anger, the mockery, the volume. They need calm, confidence, and answers. There's some good points in it, but it also then inspires Althea Raj, Toronto Star columnist, to write, when a Harper conservative goes after Pierre Poilievre, you know there's blood in the water. There's this narrative that starts forming that there's, whispers at Parliament Hill. She suggests that there is, in fact, potential floor crossers, a shadow cabinet that is forming that want to take Poilievre down. CP jumps on board. Conservatives urge to soften stance after Poilievre's comments on despicable RCMP face backlash. Piece in the Globe, Poilievre backpedals on RCMP comments after days of pushback. Anyway, guys, let me start with Peter here. How much of this was like media creating change through their stories versus what was actually going on, and how much of it was what was actually going on?
I have no idea is the short answer. The longer answer is I kind of don't believe. I'm inclined to think some of it is media manufactured for sure, in part because there's like no named sources to anything. And then everybody else picks up on it. I mean, Larry Martin, has had a distinguished journalism career, posted something on Twitter saying, "This is it." Soudis wouldn't have written this without Stephen Harper's approval, right? And this means the knives are out and it's all over it. And it's like everything went from 0 to 100 in like no time at all. And they're all in a race to chase something that is very ethereal. I mean, I don't have any doubt that there's grumbling conservatives. I mean, that's sort of the history of conservatives. They grumble.
We get the text.
In terms of that. I mean, it's nobody does it better than them. But at the same time, it's kind of like, can we have some proper journalism here? Like, can we try to get some named sources? Can we? The only thing we got on the record was a spokesperson for Stephen Harper saying, Soudis doesn't speak for Harper. And the one last thing before I wrap up is, why did everybody take the Soudis as former Harper comms guy approach as opposed to disgruntled former MP with an axe to grind against Jenny Byrne, which is the same. There's a lot of people with axes to grind against Jenny Byrne, looking for a chance to put the boot in. So
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
And there's coverage of like the actual comments themselves, which you can fairly say, some would say, this is unbecoming of someone who wants to be prime minister, is backward looking, still talking about Trudeau rather than forward looking, and sounds an awful lot like Trump, which is the very thing Poilievre should not be doing. And, he's still smarting from an election in which those comparisons are made. We can get in debate about that. Then there's the inference that this is unleashing some sort of coup, right? Based on Dimitri Soudis, who I think many people in conservative circles would say, and this is the problem. A lot of media, mainstream media, don't have conservative sources. So they are trying to read Braille. Like they don't really understand. Dimitri Soudis in many ways is seen as like yesterday's man. You remember the whole brouhaha with Eve Adams and his photo shoot with the pugs in the park. Like this is,
Sure.
as you said, Harper's people come out and say immediately, he does not speak for us. And then you see the softening of language in this column. What was initially, I guess, the language in this column. Poilievre may have officially begun, the uprising may have officially begun. It appears, this suggests. Tara, what did you make of all this?
2 points to make on this. I'm really glad that you flagged that language. That language is very telling, and I think that language points to which direction we should go with the story. And before I say anything else, I just want to say that drawing attention to that language, Jesse Brown and Canada Land did a really good job on this story of pointing some of these things out. The issue with the Dimitri Soudis criticism is that I think he makes some good points. It is criticism that the media as a whole is very predisposed to like. The media does not like Pierre Poilievre for a lot of different reasons, but also
and he doesn't like them. Yeah,
I was going to say for very personal reasons. He has been quite pugilistic and bombastic with the press corps, and they don't like it. And I think, as was the case with Donald Trump in the United States, I think it's very important for us in the media to hold firm to our standards and practices and not allow personal preferences, personal resentments, personal politics, the whole range to influence how we proceed and how we report on these things and how we opine on these things. And I think that the language in the piece is really an indication that this one went a bit far.
I'm willing to be proven wrong. We all are. Where's the coup? Like, if it happens, and we thought there might be some Quebec MPs that might cross the floor, but like, where is it, guys? Because we're coming up on a budget. There's talk of an election, like, and then is there people saying, hey, we got this wrong? We kind of maybe have exaggerated this. Peter, but I'm really stuck up on this point of like, and maybe there's cases in the past where like the media through the message has created change. Like we have immense power in terms of formulating narratives. Are there cases you can remember, and am I onto something here, that like there is often times where like the media creates change when there wasn't so much there to start with?
I'm not sure if the media itself creates change or if they're not a tool used by other people to create the sort of change they want to happen. I mean, I think we can recall, stories about chiefs of staff saying, "Oh, I can get some op-eds planted to help move this story along, or help to shine the sort of light on this story that I want to." Journalists are constantly, particularly commentators, are constantly being manipulated, and they get manipulated by people telling them things off the record that are in the know. I don't think I've never trusted that the Toronto Star has great contacts within the Conservative Party. I'm sure they have a few, or within the Conservative movement. But I think, you see it with other columnists, sometimes with the Star, and you see it going the other way sometimes with columnists from the National Post. But I think the biggest risk here is that journalists are they're seduced by the idea that they're getting a scoop. And so somebody can feed them something that gets them quite aroused, and they get very excited that they're going to have this scoop about something that's going on. And midweek last week, all kinds of people were sort of saying, "Oh my goodness, there's going to be at least one Tory across the floor today," and nothing happened, right? And this is the problem. These stories, unless you get it right, you're actually undermining the credibility of journalism, because you come out with this is what's going to happen. And like you said, they guard it with the language and say, "Oh, I never said that was going to happen." Well, yes, you did. You just used language to protect yourself in case it didn't. So like, come on, let's be serious about this. So they end up looking like fools or making fools of other people, but then everyone just moves on and pretends it didn't happen.
Interesting to compare this to Althea Raj's countless stories about the knives being out for Justin Trudeau, right? And a lot of that being proven true. And, it just goes to show her sources, being solid there on the Liberal side. Tara, any final words on this before we move to CBC?
Again, I think it's just a matter of recommitting ourselves to sort of neutral standards and practices. I think it really comes down to the boring, wonky work of journalism and holding fast to things like no speculation, no anonymous sources, that kind of stuff. I think is the solution. As unsexy as it is the solution to a lot of our problems in these kind of areas.
Okay, so block two, steady as she goes at the CBC. Apparently, we finally got this long-awaited. Maybe it was just us waiting, us three guys. But the new 5-year strategic plan drops. It opens with a land acknowledgement, of course. The CBC's plan for its some 7,000 employees, including Radio Canada. They talk about how they can't afford to rely solely on existing users. I hate the word users. I don't know what that is. Canadians, viewers, users. Please ditch that word. And fans as confirmation of their value to the public. They want to focus on young people, newcomers, and non-users or dissatisfied users. The CEO says those are people from more rural areas, Alberta, Saskatchewan. And they say they want more public debate. Peter, what did you make of the plan that they've set forward for the next 5 years?
Well, first of all, it is just a plan, and it's an aspiration. But also, they've kind of defined most of the country as their issue. When they speak of Western Canada, it's easy to forget that about at least a third of the country now lives in Western Canada. And when you're talking about the Anglophone market, it's even larger. So the Francophone market for CBC is very much based in Quebec, the Ottawa Valley, and New Brunswick. The Anglophone market is the West and rural and Toronto. So most of the big Anglophone cities are there's Toronto, and then there's Vancouver and Calgary and Edmonton in that order. So that's their challenge. But you know, I kind of read it and thought, well, so what, right? Like, what are you going to say? We're going to focus on the people that we have and ignore the people that we don't have. I mean, any corporate plan is going to say, this is where we're going to try to grow our market and this is what we're going to do. I'm more interested in what the plan is to do it than just saying you're going to do it. And also, it just appears to me that they don't actually plan on changing anything the way they do it. They're going to explain to people in the West and rural Canada. Those shouldn't be in the same phrase, by the way. But they're going to explain to them or try to understand why they don't seem to comprehend the beauty and wonder of the CBC the same way people at CBC HQ do.
Yeah, it's a customer problem, not a us problem.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
like the first stage of recovery is, I think, admitting fault, and this drives me crazy, Tara, as it does you. Just this idea that when pushed as to who are these people that aren't engaging with you, specifically on the conservative side, whether the new CEO Marie-Philippe Bouchard is challenged in committee or in interviews around this report, she just will not say the word. And I think that's one of the things that drives the right crazy, because they feel like they're being sort of gaslit. It's like, just say, why can't you just say, like, yeah, we have a blind spot or we have an issue in terms of getting, more viewers who lean right, and we're making efforts to do so. Like, why is that so hard to do? Or is it that they still don't see the problem?
Mm. I think it would go a long way to just say it. I think that's definitely one of the CBC's core problems, and just coming right out and admitting it, I think would be very helpful. But overall, my take about this latest development is slightly more optimistic. I didn't feel that the plan had much to offer on paper, but I did watch Marie-Philippe Bouchard testify at committee, and I did listen to her interview on CBC's podcast, Front Burner, and I felt that those appearances signaled some kind of more subtle shifts. So, first of all, the CBC is now admitting in public that it is not representing the range of viewpoints across the country. When I was at the CBC, that was not something that was articulated at all, ever, to my experience. So, that is a shift. Another shift is pointing out that they have become too concentrated in urban centers, that there are bubbles in those urban centers, that our workforce lives and breathes kind of progressive, fairly elite, very educated, financially comfortable areas of the country and misses huge swaths of other experiences. So I think that's a valuable admission as well. And then just lastly, the former CEO, Catherine Tate, talked a lot about things like misinformation and the need to sort of re-educate the public on how to view the news. And we're not hearing that line from Marie-Philippe Bouchard. Her line is, we're listening. Now we can debate how much or where or when, but that is a new thing that they're saying right now.
You're very forgiving, Tara. We'll give you that. She does say in an interview, it also means including a more diverse set of points of view. I'm not sure what to make of that. And then this is coupled with fighting back against disinformation and misinformation. But let me ask you this, because we were talking about this a while ago, like in terms of pivoting. The fact that they admit that 84.1% of new recruits are racialized, Indigenous, or persons with disabilities, and completely overshooting their targets for this year and continuing to keep those targets high, and how the disconnect from that versus the actual demographics of Canada. What did you make of that, Tara?
I think it just demonstrates that still the decisions are being made on the basis of identity politics. I mean, I said from the beginning that is two problems here, that the problem is top down and bottom up. And that just demonstrates that the leadership has not really shifted gears in any huge way. I do think there's shifts underway, and I do hear from people inside the building that there is more move to try to get more perspectives. But fundamentally, the brass tacks decisions are being made from a position of identity politics. And so I think that's quite telling. In terms of the conservative issue, it just does occur to me, like if you listen to the front burner interview, and full disclosure, I worked with Jamie Poisson in the beginning of her career, and I think she's terrific. So keep that in mind. But in this interview, she leads with, from one of their own listeners, the criticism that CBC leans left and ignores conservative perspectives. And she asks about Travis Danraz. She asks about the CBC going to court to conceal the numbers for CBC Gem. So I think it's a really solid piece of journalism. And I haven't heard, she asks about executive pay. She asks about how the CEO is going to hold herself accountable, since there's not very clear accountability mechanisms. So I think that too is a bit of a signal of a shift. But am I being too optimistic on that?
Well, I think it's good, to see the self-criticism, the openness on the part of the CBC to be self-critical.
Can I just make one more point on the diversity issue? I mean, Bouchard's appointment was announced about a year ago. I think it was a year ago this week, and albeit she didn't actually start the job until January the 1st, nothing has changed. She's been in the job for close to a year, and nothing has changed. There's a plan. I mean, and there's always a plan posted every year, posted in terms of that. But I have no idea what she means by if they're going to change and get more diverse perspectives. I mean, the at-issue panel is still, God bless them, Althea and Chantal and Andrew and Rosemary, each of which is eminently qualified, but as a group, there's very little diversity in terms of their opinions.
There's a lot of.
So what do they mean by more diversity? Are they going to add somebody from the West who thinks like Chantal Hébert, or an Indigenous person who thinks like Andrew Coyne, or are they going to actually find a Rex Murphy, bless his soul, or heaven forbid a Jordan Peterson, or somebody who would actually shake things up and get a much broader viewpoints going there and actually make for something that would be really interesting to watch. So I don't see any indication that maybe it's too early to draw those conclusions, but I think it's up to the CBC to prove to the disaffected that it actually, in some meaningful way, that it's serious about change. And I don't expect from any of this, and particularly from the Senate appearances last week, where Brodie Fenlon said he's never worked in a less biased newsroom than at CBC. I mean, read the friggin' room. I mean, come on, right?
That was a doozy.
You'll have to send me that clip. I don't think we'll ever.
I think they're embedded. I think the CBC is eternal. It will never change. It will survive everything.
like a Twinkie of some sort during a nuclear holocaust or something. I don't think we'll ever have another Rex Murphy, and we'll have to see that. Carney promised them a $150 million increase, making the funding statutory, so it would be harder to change that funding in the future. Budget's coming up. He's also said there'll be public sector job cuts, so we'll see where the CBC fits into that. Okay, our third and final portion here, and our most controversial portion, it has to do with feminism, so I'm going to let Tara take the torch for most of this. But there was a really big op-ed that dropped in Compact Magazine called The Great Feminization by conservative commentator Helen Andrews. Tara, can you give us a sense of what the thesis was and why it unleashed a huge response, but also seemingly not much coverage from the mainstream?
Yeah, so I think that I really wanted for us to talk about this because I've been saying for a long time that the gap between what people discuss in private and what is discussed in public in our media here in Canada is too wide. And this is a perfect example of that. So this op-ed drops. I immediately start getting journalists in this country sending it to me. I get listeners for my podcast requesting that I interview Helen Andrews, and it's been poets in the mainstream here, even as in this last week, we've seen the New York Times tackle it, the Washington Post tackle it, and then on the more independent side, the Bulwark and Persuasion, and Megan Daum had an interview with Helen Andrews. So this has been a mega viral piece, and it has not even touched the mainstream in Canada in any way, except that people are reading it here.
So what's it saying, Tara?
I wonder why that is. So let me explain what this is about. So Helen Andrews is basically saying that recently, in some fairly high-profile professions like the law, you have had the percentage of workers working in that profession tip into a majority female. Mm-hmm. And her theory, her contention is that when you have a majority female workplace, that female modes of behavior start to reshape that workplace. And so she says things like men are more comfortable with open conflict, women are more using of strategies like ostracization, that you have cancel culture and woke culture being a direct extension of this feminization of workplaces and feminization of professions. Now, I will say that there are a number of heterodox female writers who have been talking about the connection between cancel culture and women for some time. I wrote an essay for a feminist journal in the States 2 years ago about this. So this is not a new theory, but this articulation of it has gone viral. It has, of course, offended a ton of women and has really sparked a huge discussion, particularly, and I really want to focus on this, particularly on the connection between women and cancel culture. And I think that is something we could look at in this country.
Peter, what did you make of this whole idea of toxic femininity? This idea women are less supportive of free speech and instead desire inclusive society. Men want justice. Women want caring. This idea of emotions over fact. I think it gets to be a bit much at the end when she says a thoroughly feminized society is on the road to collapse. But what did
Very
you make
hyperbolic.
of, yes, the speech is much more hyperbolic than the article.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to say anything because I'm sort of a visual manifestation of the patriarchy sitting here.
You're an avatar. Yeah.
No, that was actually one of my thoughts. I thought, okay, there's a lot going on in here, but there's a lot of stuff in the article that is just stated as fact, where I would like to have seen something supporting it. Mm-hmm. And of course, the old maxim that correlation is not necessarily causation. Mm-hmm. Just because two things are happening at the same time doesn't mean they're necessarily related. They're just happening at the same time. That said, overall, I think like the media in our country, I think the bigger comment is that we're afraid to deal with controversial subjects. And anytime you have societal change, and this has been a significant societal change when you look at university enrollment, when you look at medical school enrollment, these days when you look at law school enrollment, you have to remember that just as 40 years ago, every time a man got a promotion, there was a woman sitting there going, well, if I was just part of the boys club, if I played golf with the guys, and maybe I would have got promoted, right? Feeling aggrieved. That the same thing is going to happen in reverse. when a young woman gets promoted, there's probably going to be another young woman too, but there's going to be a young man sitting there saying, well, the only reason I didn't get promoted is because I'm a man, and there's no room for men in management anymore. So, whether that's justified or not, I think as a society, you need to deal with that. If you're starting to alienate one gender or another, you get tension between the two. And it's important for employers and politicians and others to really have these discussions openly. And that's part of what media can do, is to stimulate those conversations in an intelligent, thoughtful manner. You can't do it in 600 words, but you can do it in appropriate essays and you can do audio essays and audiovisual essays.
Here's an idea,
So,
Peter.
I'd like to see that.
Here's an idea, Peter. How about the opening salvo for the new president is, allowing for debates to go on the CBC, and you have Helen Andrews pair off against one of the countless neo-feminist commentators the CBC has on, and they debate this issue. How fiery would that be? Imagine the views on that. Imagine the engagement there. Wouldn't that be fun?
People would watch that.
People would
You
watch
get
that.
a lot of people. It's like the monk debates. Yeah, it's something like
Yes.
that. You would seriously get an audience for that, and yeah, I don't know. Anyway, we're so skittish. I'd like to see a bit more spine and a bit more intelligence for people to take that on. Otherwise, it appears, I've used this phrase, we appear to have lost the vocabulary, the intellectual vocabulary to have these discussions, and I think that's even more distressing. If I'm right.
Tara, any
And one
final words on this?
argument you hear from the left in the United States is that by shying away from these debates and discussions, that they cede the floor to the hard right, what's called the manosphere. That these arguments are out there, that it's important to debate them, and if feminists, and I still count myself as a feminist, if feminists are really upset about this theory, then they should get out there in public and debunk it and go through and data point by data point and debate it. But in not debating it, in ignoring it, in keeping it out of the bounds of polite society, you do cede the floor to an online element that perhaps you would rather not.
Yeah, instead of appearing on the news station that night, it's passed around in the locker room at the gym between guys on their phones. Hey, have you seen this? And then rather than having this out in the open and actually challenging these ideas, putting numbers to it. There weren't a ton of numbers attached to this article. It'd be nice to see her defend them as well as put them forward. I think it would make for a very fascinating conversation. Okay, I'm going to end on this, because we've gone after a lot of journalists for not doing their homework, especially those in the U.S. and abroad when it comes to interviewing Canadian political figures. We saw the interview on Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, where they just talk about how much they love maple syrup and whether we live in igloos and all this stuff. We've seen it time and time before. However, it's just, is this all we are, really? And they play into it. The politicians love it because it means you're not asking serious questions. Who is asking serious questions? Bloomberg's Michelle Hussein. She did an interview with Carney. I so far think it's the best long-form interview that has been done with him. She knew stuff about Canada. Can you believe it, guys? She actually read about us and our politics. She seemed interested in it. She asked him about, the way you signed away the carbon tax. It seemed like you were signing an executive order. You're trying to be more American presidential. What was behind that theatrical signing of the pen? She talked about our digital service tax. How the heck does she know about that? She quoted him on the campaign and compared his quotes to now when it came to elbows up. I was like, we matter. We may just matter. Anyway, I throw my bouquet to her. I'm wondering if you guys have any comments on that interview, if you happen to see it. I called her out and said she did a great job, and she answered me on Twitter, so I feel even more. I'm on a cloud right now. What do you think?
I thought it was an excellent interview. And I thought in particular, the question of how do you, Prime Minister Carney, reconcile the rhetoric that you campaigned on about standing up to a bully and this new conciliatory tone? I think it's a really important question. And it may be that, the conciliatory tone is appropriate at this stage of negotiations. I'm totally open to that. But I want to hear his reasoning. And I was so glad she asked it.
She said, you'll agree that Canada is on board with the international community, and it's Western allies. He says yes, yes, and he says okay. She says, will you agree with the international court's ruling that Prime Minister Netanyahu should be arrested if he ever entered Canada? Like, that came out of left field. I've never seen someone ask that to him, and he was forced to say yes. If he landed on Canadian soil, I don't know how the heck this would possibly go down, but that Canadian authorities would arrest him. I just think it's a fascinating question to ask. Peter, do you have anything to add?
Oh, good questions. I mean, well researched questions. Good journalism, and we should point to it when we see it, and it should be an example to others. I'd like to see more interviews of that style done with domestic journalists and see how they stack up against what we're talking about.
Our politicians just have to agree to do more of them, because they've got so used to the fact that when they do them abroad, they're not asked serious questions. So maybe, I don't know, maybe they stay closer to home. We'll see how many approvals when it comes to interview requests Carney puts out in coming days following the budget and following what has been a hell of a week when it comes to trade relations. Doug Ford loves doing interviews. He'll answer your call if you're a foreign journalist abroad in the U.S. He was in the Wall Street Journal letters section today. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Okay, thank you two so much for joining us this week. It's been a pleasure as always, and we'll see you guys 2 weeks from now.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
This video is brought to you by Airbnb. This month, Airbnb is a sponsor of the Hub's YouTube channel. Governments are rightly focused on addressing Canada's housing crisis, but when they spend time restricting short-term rentals like Airbnb, they're not focused on what's most important. According to Statistics Canada, the number of short-term rentals that could potentially become long-term homes amounts to only 0.6% of Canada's housing stock. Canada needs almost 6 million new homes by 2030 to achieve affordability, and a closer look clearly shows that building more housing, not restricting short-term rentals, is the only real solution. To learn more, go to airbnb.ca.